actually find it kind of interesting. The verses today were garments, because one of the things that I repeat to myself a lot when I'm nervous or I need to do something in faith is, "The Lord is upon my head like a crown, and I shall not be without him." It's from an apocryphal book of the Bible. So I thought that was neat that all of the verses were about garments. That said, may the meditations of my mind and the words of my mouth be acceptable to you, O Lord. You were born for such a time as this. This is a paraphrase of the end of a verse from Esther that my spiritual circle quotes themselves often. It is a reminder of our place in space and time and culture, and that God put us here for a reason. It reminds us that we are called. When I was 3, my mother, my father's mother, and a family friend and her daughter were together in the living room of the house. The daughter of the friend, Stephanie, had recently had a baby. She was holding the newborn in her arms. It was a few months old, maybe a year. There had been some contention between her and her husband. He was an atheist and did not want the baby baptized. He wanted to wait and let the child make the decision when they were older. Stephanie wanted to have the baby baptized as a baby, because that is what Christians usually do with babies. I was in the room, likely playing with Matchbox cars on the table. I don't really remember, I was very young, about 3. And after a while of this conversation, I came over and asked to hold the baby. The ladies, seeing no issue, made room for me, and I got up on the couch. I held the baby, they put it on my lap. I was a toddler still. And I looked at the baby, and I looked at the women in the room, and I looked back at the baby. And I took my finger, and I made the sign of the cross on the baby's head, and I said, "I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." My mother remembers that my grandmother, who is now a deacon, married to my priest grandfather, began to bawl, and so did my mother. And then all of the women began to laugh, and they commented that it seemed that the husband did not have a say in the baptism of the baby because it had been done. We flash ahead to when I was 5 in St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Maryland, where I was baptized. One morning before church, I was running around as a 5-year-old boy is wont to do, and I made my way over to the bishop's chair. Now, if you've never been in an Episcopal church, it's like a Roman Catholic church with the grand architecture and the fancy robes, and there's a giant wooden throne next to the altar. No one sits in it except the bishop when he visits. If the bishop's not there, no one sits in it. So I made my way over to the chair and sat myself down in it. And with great authority, I put my arms up on the armrest and sort of swung my feet back and forth. A more conservative member of the church, what we would call a high church Episcopalian, sort of clutched her pearls at the event and said, "He can't sit there, you need to move him." And the priest of the parish walked over and said, "No, he looks comfortable, like he belongs there." I call this my "I was in my father's house" moment. I tell you these stories in the context of the paraphrase from Esther, because these are the stories I tell myself, to remind myself in times of doubt that, yes, I was very likely called to the path that I have set out on, that is the path of a priest. I've known this from a young age, but my calling got clearer and more focused as I aged. In high school, I walked around in my bathrobe with a colored towel around my neck indicating the season of the church year. I read from my teen study Bible, mostly the Psalms. My friends were attracted to the poetry of the book and the verses about deliverance from enemies and protection. I had a lot of friends who were bullied, so deliverance helped. I also read from James because it was short and the messages were practical and easy to grasp for teenagers. I started to memorize that book at one point. It was well known that I was a Christian person. I was a Jesus kid. I participated in the discussion-like services of Saturday Night Alive here at SUMC when Pastor Joe used to do that. And I talked about religion and faith with my friends. I still do. I talk about it a lot. I taught about forgiveness, something that my friends at school didn't think they were going to get from God. And I had become this young minister. It had become part of my identity. There was another piece of my identity that had been developing at the same time. There was a second seed that God had planted. One with which I would struggle and one that would clarify my calling. On February 13th, 2012, at the age of 16, I came out to my parents as gay. They were the first people I ever told. To get to the point where I could tell them, I had been pacing at the top of the stairs in my bedroom. I had gotten on my knees and I had called to God for strength to declare what he had made known to me. They already had an inclination. I had admitted that I wasn't sure about that part of myself several months earlier. But I had been thinking about it for years. As I read to my friends in school, I had been studying the Bible. I had been reading interpretations and watching sermons from every point of view. I had read essays, I had watched talks, I had bought books, and I had been praying. And I came to a final conclusion. God made me this way, and it was part of my calling. I wrote this a little over a year ago, when Pastor Stephen first asked me to share my faith journey. And I tried to tell the story so many ways, and to cut out this part, and to tell anything else. And every time I hit a wall, I couldn't find anything else to say. So I turned to the Bible, as one does, and I looked in Esther at verse 4:14, that verse that I quote and that I paraphrased at the beginning of the sermon, and I noticed that I hadn't been reading the entire verse. This is the verse in its entirety. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. For if you keep silence at such a time as this. I realized why I kept hitting a wall, why I couldn't find anything else to say. It was because God called me to say something very specific. The United Methodist Church holds that being gay is incompatible with Christian teachings, and the most recent decisions by the General Conference have upheld those statements. I am not a walking oxymoron. I don't live a double life. I'm not a gay person and a Christian. I am a gay Christian. God called me and made me this way to minister to people by my very existence. The realization that I was gay drove me further into my faith. I learned apologetics and how to defend myself spiritually. I learned to test for the fruit of the Spirit, being in a sort of new world. I learned to see the loving and living God in all people and places. My being gay and being Christian became inexorably linked. They couldn't be separated. I knew that I was called to find the people who the church had driven away from the love of Christ and reach out to them. I was called to go to the world and bring back those who had been told they weren't worthy of the love of God, to seek the people condemned to hellfire, and to show them that they have not been excluded from salvation. But I am also called to people like you, who are already members of the church, and to minister to you. The church has not been kind to people like me. It has shunned and turned away and done very real harm to my community. But people like me have taken the Bible in hand and said, no, God put me here, and he made me this way for a reason. And so I stand before you, a minister of Jesus Christ, however unordained, and by my existence declare a message of hope and love and acceptance. I cannot say that I am surprised by the decision of the General Conference. I saw this fight starting a long time ago, and I knew that it would play out over many years and that it might not end in a positive way. But I was joyfully surprised when I saw the outpouring of support by United Methodist churches in protest of the decision, who gave out messages of support, and I saw many pastors who gave sermons in which they passionately disagreed with the decision. One of them, which touched me deeply, was of one Pastor Joe Monahan. He spoke in support of LGBTQ Christians. I had never told him about myself, but I am overjoyed to know that he would have stood behind me. His message gave me hope, and so I'm here to spread that hope with you. I tell everyone I meet about the fact that I'm a Christian, and I also tell most people I meet that I'm gay. It often happens in the same breath. Some are shocked, some are baffled, and I have gotten hostility from Christians who disagree with me, and I've gotten hostility from gay people who are uncomfortable with Christianity. But I have no intention of stopping talking about any of these things. I cannot keep silent, because I was born, and I was born this way, for such a time as this. Thank you.